Welcome to the EHJ Today. My name is Stehli. I'm a fellow cardiologist at the University Hospital in Zurich, Switzerland. Joining me here today is Jeroen Bax, a cardiologist who certainly needs no introduction. Jeroen, as a specialist in cardiac imaging, do you think it's still wise for young fellows to concentrate solely on one imaging modality, though there's a clear trend towards multimodality imaging?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think that over the years we've witnessed a shift from working in one modality and being very oriented on one modality towards multimodality. We at our place were actually always interested in fusing these modalities rather than working with one single modality. So if you ask me what the future is, I would say actually as of some years ago, it is already shifting towards multimodality imaging. I believe that people should be trained multimodality. I also believe that it is virtually impossible that one person trains in all four modalities: echo, nuclear, CT, and MRI. So I would say what I usually suggest to people who work in clinical cardiology, want to train in imaging, that they train in echocardiography, which is the thing that we always use on a day-to-day basis, and then choose another one. So combination between echo and MRI is very good. Or you could say I take echo for more structural imaging and I work with that, and then I use CT nuclear in combination for ischemia, anatomy, coronary anatomy assessment.
Yeah, but do you think it's still possible to gain extensive knowledge at more than one, like echo and MR imaging modality at an academic level? Or is this rather for, yeah?
No, I think so. I think you are able, one should be able to master at an academic level two modalities. Four modalities I think is not possible, but two modalities is certainly possible.
Instead of specializing in different imaging modalities, one could also argue that it maybe makes more sense to specialize in a specific topic like valve replacements or ischemia.
That's another trend that we're witnessing. I personally believe that it's better to work from modalities and learn to apply them to specific pathologies, but the fundament, I think, should be the modalities. Of course, if you, as a director of a department, you want to use the imaging to support the management of specific heart diseases. But for one who's being specialized and being trained, it would be, I think, not a good thing that you have one who's trained specifically in echo for structural heart disease and another one in your department who's trained for echo in, let's say, valvular heart disease, and one is trained for echo and LV function. Then you diffuse too much the single modality. I would rather say you are training, specializing in one or two at an academic level imaging modalities, and from a clinical point of view, from a departmental point of view, it is good that you apply, as a head of directing the department, that you apply the imaging towards the diseases. But my answer to your question is, I would certainly master two modalities and not modalities only focusing at this or that disease.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting view. We know that it's very difficult also for cardiac fellows to find a position for a specialized training. What do you think about the fact that clinics and research labs all over the world hire fellows from abroad who pay their own way instead of educating their own fellows?
You know, I think that's a difficult trend. We see that indeed. We see that people come to places with their own money to train. I think if you are head of, let's say, a large imaging unit or head of a department of cardiology, you are training your own fellows. So these are the ones that I think that you're responsible for. So you should open certainly your department to those people to train what they need to train. In addition to that, you could home specific people that come with their money to train in your department, because there usually is no funding available for that. But I would be a little bit against that you start to see that people start to move from place to place and go there with fundings, because it blocks the fellows at the local place. And also I think the trend will create something that is hard to maintain, because where's all that money going to come from?
Yeah, exactly. That was actually my next question, because now in a time where public and institutional funding is very scarce, what's the best strategy to get some funding money?
So I believe, coming back to the first question, that a department should be able to provide to, let's say, a certain level training in the different fields in cardiology. And on top of that, if you really want to specialize and want to go somewhere, it's good to spend 1 year somewhere here or there, but getting the money for that is, as you say, getting more and more complex. Societies are trying to do that, like ESC, EHJ, ACC. Sometimes industry provides unrestricted grants for that. Governments can help in that, but that's going to be more and more difficult in the near future, I anticipate.
At academic center, there's still the expectation that even highly specialized clinicians do well-funded research. Do you think serious research is still compatible with extensive clinical activities?
That depends a bit on the sort of research we're talking about. If you go very deep into basic science as a clinical physician, it is almost by definition impossible to do in 1 week 3 to 4 days of clinical service and then go very deep the rest of the week into basic science, simply because it takes a lot of time. If you, however, do clinical research, clinical science, you could combine that with the field that you're working in. Let's say that you're working the whole week in electrophysiology. Then it's very possible that you take out of your 5-day working week, 2 days per week if the organization permits, and you look deep into the development of your research track there. But that's clinical research, and it would be best if that's directly related to your clinical activities, because then you see all the day on the work floor the things that you're working with research-wise. So to answer your question, I think these two go together. I think it's possible. First of all, you need to have the support of your institution/department, but also I think you should be try to combine what you do clinically and what you do research-wise. And I think that way it's probably possible to combine that. Not everybody has to do that. Some people don't like to do that. Some people like to do also in an academic university hospital just clinical work. And some like to do more research than clinical work. But I think it would also be unwise if you do clinical research in your specific field that you don't do any clinical work anymore. For example, you see the patients, you note the problems, you note the changing environment with changing procedures, and based on that, you can direct your clinical research. If you miss that input, it's going to be very difficult to stay on top of newest procedures and then develop your research around that. You need the clinical input to develop your clinical research. It's different with basic science research.
So regarding clinical research, when do you think as a cardiology fellow is the right time to start research at an academic track?
That's a difficult question. I think because I've seen both tracks. In our department in the Netherlands, we have fellows that start after their basic medical school. So they've trained fully as a doctor, but they've not specialized yet. Those fellows can do a PhD. That happens a lot in the Netherlands, and after that they will train in clinical cardiology. So when they do the PhD, they look deeply over 3 to 4 years into, let's say, a specific dilemma. Let's say imaging and atrial fibrillation to predict who gets back atrial fibrillation and who remains in sinus rhythm. So they spend then 3 to 4 years doing that. They have all the time because they have no clinical activities, so they can really look very deep into the subject. The downside of it is that then you want to talk about echocardiography, you want to talk about other imaging procedures, relate that to things, and they don't have that knowledge yet. They've never worked clinically, so those things don't mean anything to them. So you see the dilemma. And then I get also these research fellows from abroad, from other places, let's say Australia I have at the moment, Singapore I have at the moment one person coming from, and they have been fully trained in cardiology, so they've done all the things, and then they have the opportunity to specialize in that. Now that's a good situation if you go somewhere else and you can fully focus on that, but if you do that in your own place, so you've done your basic medicine, then you've done your training in cardiology, and after that you want to do PhD research, which takes a lot of time, then you're being bothered parts of the week with clinical activities. So you have difficulties to focus really on that research. Of course, that changes after once you've done a lot of experience with research. Later on, you can combine that easier. But you have to have some period in your life, I think, where you're almost 100% focusing on your research. So doing the PhD program that we do in Holland, 3 to 4 years. And so you could do that before your training in cardiology, but then you miss the clinical knowledge. Or you can do it after your training in cardiology, but then you usually have to do more clinical activities. So neither of them is perfect, unless you are lucky and you can go to another place and actually you dig in there deeply into what you want to do and you don't have clinical activities.
Yeah.
That's my idea.
Yeah. So let's look into the future. Next year you'll become the president of the ESC. What is your vision for the society?
The society is doing extremely well at the moment. We have at this moment in time, as we're speaking, the Congress running, and we have more than 32,000 people attending. So it's doing extremely well. It will be a challenge, and a big challenge actually, to maintain at this level. What for me are the pillars of the society? The pillars of the society are education, Congress, guidelines, and journals. That's really what our society is very good at. So I have some innovative things in all these tracks, but basically I will focus on these 4 pillars to maintain the success that the society currently has. In addition to the pillars, you have the parties, the players. So we have associations, as you know, subspecialization subgroups. To keep them working together and to still have enough freedom for each individual association is a continuous challenge. But I think we will be able to do that. So that's something I will pay a lot of attention to make sure that we keep them together and also ensure individualization possibilities. Then the other thing is that we are not in America, where you have only one country. We have a lot of countries that are all put together, the national societies, we refer to them. And another challenge will be to involve the national societies maximum in all the activities that we do, so that they feel at home, that they feel part of what we're doing. Actually, this society exists because of all these national societies. So if you ask me what I'm going to focus on, then it's these things. The 4 pillars, the associations, the national societies, and then I forget the working groups and the councils. You know, we have a council for basic science, which is very important, and all these things we need to sort of bring together and then further develop the future.
And your future regarding cardiac imaging, you as a specialist in cardiac imaging, what's the #1 target you're looking forward in the next decade, or what achievements can we look forward in the future?
I think what's very interesting that we spoke about technology, we spoke about clinical applications, we spoke about should the focus be the disease or the equipment that you're using. I think we see interesting developments. One is actually the fusion of modalities. So now we have PET-CT scanners, we have PET-MR scanners. There will be more fusion of modalities. And that will actually create a new challenge for the modern imager, because they are just struggling to learn 1-2 techniques. And now we are fusing these techniques, so it's going to become much more technologically oriented than it was before. In addition to that, and that comes back to your earlier question about disease-oriented imaging, I think we have, for everything we do in imaging, everything comes down to either anatomical visualization or functional visualization. Anatomical is just looking at, let's say, a heart or the valves. But the functional imaging is more like how severe is that valve stenotic and what are the consequences of this stenosis. So I also believe that technological integration is going to take place, but also more integration between anatomic imaging and functional imaging. And I think if we can make further steps in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, then we're doing quite well. If we move in fusion, and also not fusion of technology, but also fusion of anatomical and functional imaging. To give you one short example, nowadays, if we do an angiogram, we see a stenosis, it's no longer accepted that a PCI immediately follows, but we should then look for ischemia. So we're fusing anatomy, that we're seeing the stenosis severity, with the functional consequences, which is the question, is there ischemia or not? So that, I believe, will be the future of imaging, integration.
Okay, thank you very much for that interview.
Thank you very much.